This is a little tutorial explaining how I did some of the base shapes for this sculpture. So we've got a little sort of sci-fi man who I've sculpted into. Before I started sculpting, he looked more like this. These are the base shapes. I'm going to pull out a few to demonstrate how I made them. Okay, let's start with the body. Pull it out onto another layer. Hide. Okay, this shape is two lathes pushed together. I'll demonstrate how I made it. I'm going to switch to the left view. I'll just dull down the colour so we can see which one I'm working on. So I picked the lathe tool and I'm going to draw a curve down the front of the shirt. And the object I've just built is on an invisible layer. There we go. I'll also hide this object a bit. Okay, there we go. There's our new lathe with one curve drawn. There. I'll draw another curve down the back. Now we have a sort of round shape, starting to look like the chest. And finally, in the front view, I'm going to draw one more curve down the side of the shirt. And I'm going to click symmetry over here, which means that this last curve will effectively be repeated on the other side. Okay, there's our symmetrical object. I'll pull away the there's the original. You'll notice that the bottom is quite smooth. I want to take away that smoothness and make it quite a sharp end, so I turn off rounded. That gives us this sharper edge. And at the top I'm going to use the widget soft move tool just to pull the curves to meet at a point. That'll just ensure they're nice and smooth at the top. So that's the basic torso. Now we need to create a sleeve. And again, we use the lathe tool. This time I'm going to start off in the front view. There's a basic lathe. It's a bit wobbly, so let's do a smooth more, which we can shortcut with Control S. And on the other side. You can tap T on the keyboard to get the shortcut to the widget tools. Okay, just move that a little bit backwards so it sits on the torso nicely. Probably usually a good idea to save before you do any big merge operations. So I'm going to take the sleeve and put it as a child of the torso. I did that by dragging the sleeve on top of the torso item, and it puts it underneath in the hierarchy. Then I can use weld to parent with the sleeve selected. Weld to parent. This leaves us with a joined model, and the seam is selected. So if I press S a bit, it'll smooth out that seam. And you can see that the triangle's now quite regular along the edge. We might need to smooth it a little bit more, so we can press S or Control S to smooth out that. So we've now got a nice smooth seam on the shirt. And that's basically how I did the torso. I'm just going to move all of the other objects onto a different layer. So we're not using the default layer. Okay. I'm using this little button in the top left to switch between view types. Okay, different bits of the object I want to show off. Okay, next is the cloak here. So there's two pieces of cloak. They're handled in much the same way. I'll just pull it out so you can see the object as a whole. Now there I've got 4 curves, and between them, because they shrink down towards the left hand side, it looks like the cloak is tapering off. I'll just show you how I drew that. So effectively we're just drawing a small curve, small C curve, and then a big C curve, which gives us most of the shape. And then I right clicked to select this little curve on the end, and I cloned the curve. Switch to the top view. So I'm going to make the target one blue. So this is a cloned curve. I can rotate that into place on this side, and I can do one more curve mirror clone to automatically pop out a similar curve on the other side. And between these I've got fairly good control of the profile, the outline of the cloak. Just want to move them down so it doesn't look too kinked. So there we've got one shoulder of the cloak. Again, we can turn off the rounded end to get a bit of a sharper edge to the cloak. I chose to not add the fold. There's a fold in the final version of the cloak, but I could potentially add that if I wanted by adding a sort of S shape. And there we've added a bit of a kink to the curve. So some shapes, some details you might want to add on in the curves themselves. Otherwise you can always paint them on to the models using the sculpt tools. Okay, next I'm going to show you one more lathe technique for these gauntlets. And these were incredibly simple, but you just draw a sort of shaky line Mirror clone the curve, move it into place, and increase the resolution to give it a sharp edge. And finally, you can also use the ruler tool to just sort of smooth out the curve if you need to, make it a bit more manufactured. Okay, next, the belts are a very simple lathe, consisting of really simply just 3 lines, but drawn together with symmetry they make a nice belt shape, and with the rounded edge turned off they fit in very nicely to make belts. And you can also sort of just rotate them to make like these like diagonal belts. I'm going to make the gun and the bottle. Let's see. Select gun. Notice I'm using the layers panel to select lots of objects at once. Okay, the belt was made as I showed you before with a lathe. Now the rest of the gun is made of all sorts of different primitives. Basically a cube, a lathe and a slab. So here's a cube. Set the height and the length and the width. You can also use the widget controls here to set its width and stuff. There we go, just setting the gun. And this gun has a little target on top. We can just move that into place. The holster, quite a simple base shape, but you can add more detail of course in the sculpting phase, is a slab, and for a slab we draw an outline of the object. And it automatically turns it into an extruded shape, which we can adjust again with the scale tools or the move tools. Again, like all the other curvy objects, you can move this one in real time, but you have to take a bit of care to keep it relatively flat, otherwise the surface distorts quite a lot. Okay, the final shape is a lathe. You should by now have a good idea how to make that. Just a couple of curves. Turn off the rounded on the end. Move it into shape, place. And on this one I'll just use a Bezier curve filter to really smooth it off nicely. I can also turn it into a mesh to shape it a bit more easily. So I pressed K to turn it into a mesh, and now I can distort it and scale it more easily. There we go, just sort of pull it into shape. So that's basically the gun. The bottle's made the same way, with a slab for the body of the bottle. It's very simple. And then a lathe for the top of the bottle. What else we have? Yes, we have a cloak on his back, and for that cloak I used a loft object. So notice the order in which I'm drawing these curves: middle, bottom, top. And again, I'm going to shape these curves. This time I'm going to use a semi-ellipse. And I'm going to use another ellipse shape. And maybe a Bezier shape for the middle curve. This currently is a very sort of thin object. If we want to thicken up the cloak a little bit, we can use the depths control, and that gives it some thickness. A little bit of thickness and a little bit of bevel just makes the edges show off nicely. The trousers, again, you can see are just made of 4 curves, front, back, left and right. And they give a lot of the form to the trousers before I start sculpting. The collar is another loft. See how I move a curve round and then 2 lines. The little tail of the cloak here again is a loft, with curvy line at one end and a curvy line at the other end and a straight line in the middle, and it makes for a wibbly, twisty little bit of cloth. The cloak is a lathe, and this one is quite a tricky shape. I guess you can say it's almost like a sort of boat shape. But again, it's just made of 3 C shapes, and moving them around distorts the shape quite easily. For this shape, I didn't try to model it too much with the lathe curves. I was just trying to get the geometry down, and then I knew that later on I could say just drag down the sides and shape it into a more sort of natural falling shape. The head again is 3 curves. This time I used them to define the shape of the chin as well. So there's the front curve, basically a C shape, the back curve, a C shape, and the shape of the jawline with the 3rd curve, and again with symmetry turned on makes a good head shape. As a shortcut to say making the skull cap and the band around the head, as a shortcut to that, I used the original curves and just trimmed the edges. You have to take care that the shortest part of the curve is always trimmed, so you have to trim close to the end and trim a few times to cut down to the length you want. And it's just neater than trying to redraw the curves from scratch. There's one band. And of course it just needs to be scaled up a little. Yes, with the few little spheres for decoration. So that fundamentally is how I made the model, and then I just went in and added a few creases to the clothes and a little bit of definition to the face with the sculpting tool. But that was very much just like a sketch over the top at the last minute.